As we ramp into another San Francisco trip cross-country, we've got a couple of news items and disclaimers to go through for this week prior to all of the expected major coverage later in the week. The news this week, we've got the Cloud Bleed exploit, kind of interesting. There's a new delidding kit that is for the Kaby Lake and Skylake processors, Mass Effect system requirements, and then, of course, Ryzen, we can't go 5 minutes without talking about right now, so I have a quick thing to say on that. For Ryzen, in our original coverage of the CPU, what AMD permitted us to publish on day one, which I believe was February 22nd, that coverage included a disclaimer saying, hey, don't pre-order this. And the reason we said that is because generally, as a rule, GN, the site, does not recommend pre-ordering anything, hardware, software, games, or otherwise. And that holds true with Ryzen. It is hardware. When a company posts the prices, the specs, and opens pre-ordering, but does not allow, in this case because we didn't have enough time or even have the unit yet, does not allow reviews to go live, that is for only one reason, and that's to drive pre-order sales. So just the only reason I'm mentioning this again is because the hype train's been out of control lately. I'm seeing nonstop Ryzen this, Ryzen that, Ryzen does amazing things, Ryzen's a miracle worker, Ryzen is terrible, Ryzen doesn't have support for whatever. It goes both ways, and it's nonstop. So just to kind of bring everyone back down to earth, don't pre-order. It would be very reasonable for you to assume, based on historical context, that we would have a review in time for launch. That would not be an unreasonable thing to assume if you look at our history posting other CPU and GPU reviews on or around launch day. Wait for our review as always. So that's stated. You just make sure it does what you need in the review. There's different aspects of the processor, and then decide. So let's move on from Ryzen for once. We just published an article today about a new security vulnerability called Cloud Bleed. That was written by Eric Hamilton. It's on the website if you're curious for the full details, but the basics of it. Cloud Bleed stems from a service provider called Cloudflare. They are effectively a middle service. They sit between the client and the server when you're accessing websites. It acts basically as a front loader. We use similar front loading services, not Cloudflare, but we do use a front loading service for our site. It's a very common thing to do. And normally when you access one of these types of services as a user, you never really notice. The only reason that something like this sits there, well, there's a few reasons, but the main one is for security. So to use Eric's quote from the article, it is acutely ironic that Cloudflare, using a service to provide security, has a security vulnerability that is massive because of the way their service works. It also does things like page caching, helps with site speed, but mostly it's for DDoS protection and cloud-based security, which what that means is that in theory, when a website is compromised or has an exploit or an injection attack or something like that, in theory, a cloud-based firewall is supposed to help protect all of the other websites under that umbrella. Cloud Bleed is a vulnerability wherein Cloudflare's HTML parser could lead to a buffer overrun where data was stored on uninitialized memory, causing memory corruption. With the right or the wrong circumstances, user data could be injected into the web page, the source code that is, and then later cached by search engines, which is obviously a massive issue. Cloudflare says this was first discovered in September of 2016, but the biggest point of vulnerability was February 13th to 18th, just recently. The company doesn't think that any user data was exposed in a way which could threaten their privacy, passwords, things like that, but just from our own perspective, we're recommending that you change passwords because, of course, they're going to say they don't think that anything is in trouble there, at least not until something's proven. So change your passwords, basically. There are a lot of websites that use Cloudflare. There are, I believe, 150 or more that were implicated in this vulnerability, and they have not released and probably will not release the full list because of a lot of reasons. But you can check the article at gamersnexus.net or hit the link in the description below for some of the sites that were affected. Now, just a quick primer. Change.org, pretty big site, was affected, and even Discord was affected by this. So with all the Ryzen news going on, we've almost forgotten about Kaby Lake, but there is a new delidding kit for it. We still have plans eventually to do, we have a rocket kit for delidding the 7700K eventually, hopefully just after Ryzen. But the new kit is from Aqua Computer, and it is called Dr. Delid. It delids the Skylake and Kaby Lake processors if you have either one of those. And the kit is pretty straightforward. It separates the IHS and the substrate by just rotational force. So you socket the CPU into the delitter and spin it, and in theory it should just separate very cleanly and easily without any screws or anything like that, no razor blades, as you may have seen in other videos. The rest of the kit, the only thing that's really kind of interesting that I wanted to point out is that it's got a simple clamp, just a vice grip basically, that holds the CPU in its socket for when you're reapplying an adhesive to hold the IHS to the substrate. So it'll stick on there and you can walk away from it while it cures. But that should retail for about $30. That is Dr. Delid. We haven't actually looked at it in person or anything, but wanted to point it out because these things seem to be becoming more popular now with Kaby Lake and how much temperature headroom you can get from delidding the processors. In gaming news that pertains to hardware, Mass Effect Andromeda now has its system requirements and recommended specs revealed, and that's officially this time. So BioWare is recommending for the CPU a 4790 i7 CPU or an 8350 FX CPU for the processor, and then for the GPU, they're suggesting a GTX 1063GB or RX 480 4GB video card with memory suggested, as in the recommended specs, at 16GB. That's kind of interesting and a bit different, but the rest of it's not so bad, really. Requirements, we're looking at Windows 7 for the baseline OS, so Windows 7 is supported. The API is DirectX 11, if not obvious from Windows 7 support. And then the CPU baseline requirement, hard requirement, 3570 or 6350 from the FX line or better, with the GPU being a GTX 660 or HD 7850 2GB card or better. 7850, by the way, was our first ever official test bench video card and hasn't aged so well. In monitor news, manufacturer AOC just announced new curved 16:9 displays, both with an 1800R curvature. Both panels are VA type, one at 27 inches, the other at 31.5, with 1080p and 1440p resolutions respectively. Refresh rates on these panels are also matched, each at 144 Hz with a 4 millisecond gray-to-gray response and adaptive sync capabilities. Though neither is certified for FreeSync right now, it is theoretically possible that they could be. And AOC also has 5 more displays that should be launching in the US shortly. We have those detailed in the news article on the website if you're curious about them. Availability for the curved displays is slated for Europe in May, and the US currently has no availability or price listed. So that's it for the news roundup. This is a big week for us. We have another event that, when this goes live, I'll probably be on the way to. So we have another event in San Francisco, and then we have some other major coverage because there are a couple different launches this week. So stay tuned to the channel, subscribe for more, patreon.com/gamersnexus as always. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time. I feel like the table's at an angle.